Okay. Hi, everyone. So basically, I need to do a quick Torah, or not Torah and parsha shelach, and um, it's it's very parsha shelach is probably um one of the most Yisodistic parshias in the Torah in terms of its contribution to the understanding of how Klal Yisrael and how human beings work and how what the issues are that need to be addressed in order for in order for there to be for there to be a geula and for in terms of our ability to hold on to Eretz Yisrael. And so it's very very highly relevant to today's atmosphere and what's going on in the world at large right now. So it's worth delving into and getting an idea of what's going on in the parsha. So essentially, we have an idea where we say, um, you know, this idea of shelach lecha nashim that Moshe sends, as famously is known, the meraglim, and the meraglim are the they're the heads of the shvatim, right? They're the ksherim, the chashuvim, right? Rashi says over here that we have shalach nashim, and Rashi says that what does anashim mean? Anashim means, where is it? Is it over here? Um, here, kulam anashim. So Rashi says kulam anashim, kol anashim shemikra chashivas. All of anashim shemikra, whenever it says the word, in enosh, right, in ish, that is a lashon of chashivas, importance, and um, Rashi. So therefore, what's going on? So what's Rashi he's saying? He's saying that it's lashon chashivas. So if it's lashon chashivas, then these are the meraglim that did the sin of lashon hara, and they caused the entire walk in the desert, right? And we know what that's why this is in Parshat Bamidbar, right? The desert. So he's trying to be miyasha, right? He's trying to fan for it. So l'chayra, you'd have a kasha. The kasha would be, how could it be that these are kulam anashim? We're saying the chashuvim. So then how could he have done such a big sin? So Rashi fan for it, he says no. Va'isa sha'a, as you see over here, va'isa sha'a ksherim hayu, right? They were kosher at the time of the when they were chosen to be the meraglim. Right now, okay. Then we have another Rashi, and Rashi says like this. Rashi says something it's a pliya because um because it's Seiser, this Rashi, and in general it's a pliya um because it just doesn't make sense. um so Rashi says over here, this is talking about the Meraglim again. They left, they went, and they came. And Moshe ve'alaro. So Rashi says, as you can see over here, he says, "My ve'yelechu." What does it mean, vayelechu, and they went? What does that mean? So he says, lahakish halichasan lebiyasan. It's to compare, contrast, connect the halicha of the meraglim to the coming of the meraglim. Ma biyasan be'itzara, just like when they came back from spying, they had an eitzara, right? They had an idea which was negative, bad, evil. Af halichasan be'itzara. So too, when they're leaving, was an eitzara. It was in a they had evil intentions, an evil eitzah. Tzas Hashem hitakum. An eitzah is like a plan, right? And so Rashi is saying that they left with an evil plan. But we just saw the Rashi above in the beginning of the parsha that says that they didn't leave with that they were sharing by Sashah. So how could it be that they were sharing by Sashah and at the same time you're here saying that they left with a bad plan? If they were ksherim, then how did they have an eitzah as ksherim? Makes no sense. So that's one kasha. Then you have another kasha on the lashon of Rashi over there. Rashi says that ba'isashah ksherim hayu. At that time, they were kosher, right? Ksherim hayu. So l'chora, it's a very weird, right, very strange lashon, because what are you saying essentially? You're saying right. So sherim hayu. They were kosher at that time. You can't see it over here, but that's the lashon of Rashi. He says va'isasha sherim hayu, which basically means that they were kosher. So here now you can see it. Ksherim hayu, right? So you see it. Now, what kind of lashon is that? I mean, we're talking about the Rashi Shvatim, the heads of the Shvatim, and you're saying that they're kosher. What does that mean? What kind of lashon is that? That's a very weird language. Why don't you say they were tzaddikim hayu, anavim hayu, whatever it is? There's so many terminologies to describe somebody who is a tzaddik, who's a good person, who's. Why do you say they're kosher? They're ksherim hayu. What does that imply? So that's that kasha, and then we're gonna get more broad, right? The apex, so to speak, of this parsha occurs when the Meraglim come back, right? And the Meraglim, they say we can't do this, right? They were kfira, they were kaifer, right? They said we can't do it. We can't do it. And then it says, "Vaitisa kol haida dimus kolam vayifkuam balaylahu." Kol haida. So actually, that refers to the Sanhedrios, which is interesting. And so that is where Hashem says to them, to find the exact Rashi. Hashem says to them, "Look, you guys, you cried for nothing." Here, it's a Gemara in Tainus. Okay, Uksiv, this is the pasuk we just looked at in this week's parsha. Amar Rabba Amar Rabbi Yochanan, O Salayla Leil Tisha B'Av Haya. That was the night of Tisha B'Av. Amar Lama Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to the Jewish people, Atan b'chizan b'chir shel chinam. You have cried a free cry. Okay? Va'ani koveh lechem b'chir l'doros. And in contrast to that, or in response to that, rather, I'm going to be kover for you a cry for generations. So it's very clear, this being the apex of the entire parsha of the Pshat, that the idea over here is that there was a cry, a free cry, right? Which that was a very strange lesson, right? We have to understand, what does that mean? What does it mean, the free cry? What does that mean? A bechia shel chinam, a cry for free. They cried for free. So some people say for nothing. So, but I mean, l'chara, that itself isn't accurate either, because they're, over there, then there's a different way to say that in Hebrew, right? Bechia shel mabakach, bechia shel klum, bechia she'enem mamish. There's a bunch of different ways that Chazal could have put it, that they use the lashinus. The bechia shel chinam means free, right? That's what it means. So it's a strange lesson that we're using, right? And then on top of this, we have to understand. So again, the shilas that we're raising so far are the following. First of all, Mr. and Rashi. Rashi says kulam anashim, they're ksherim. Then he says that actually they left Beit Sarah. If they left Beit Sarah, then how could they be ksherim? That's kasha number one. Kasha number two is what? Shaila number two is, what is the definition of the idea of bechir shel chinam? What does it mean? What does it mean free? If it meant that there was nothing to it and there was no reason for it, then it wouldn't say chinam. It would say that the idea is because you are you're what you call it? You're doing it, b'chia she'enu shel mamish, or b'chia al mabakach, b'chia al klum, right? This is lashon of Chazal, it's not in the Torah. So Chazal have other words that they used out of the Gemara that they could have expressed the idea better. What's the idea of chinam, which is free? And then we want to know weiter, what is pshat in this idea of this being the 10th test, right? Because we know that essentially Klal Yisrael had messed up many times until this point, right? To be precise, 9. And as the Mishnah and Avos says, that this was the 10th time that the Jewish people tested God. And because this was the 10th time, God said, I've had it. You're done. You're not going to be going to Eretz Israel, and that was your last chance, and you're done. So the shaila really is like what is the pshat over here? Meaning, how does it work? Because you're saying that somehow they're saying that this 10th one, the real shayla is like this. The real shayla is when you have a number, right? You create a number system for a certain category, and then you say 1, 2, 3, right? Essentially, what you're doing is the idea of numbers is that they create the whole essence of a number is that it has an association in terms of another thing outside of it which is similar, and you want to create a contrast based off the fact that it's the first of that group, right? So one is only one if two exists and zero exists, and two is only two if there's one before it, right? So that's the idea of numbers. So when you say there were 10 tests, right, it can't be pshat that there's 10 random things that the Jewish people did wrong, and then at the 10th one, as if God has like a temper and he gets fed up. So at the 10th one, he got fed up. God got fed up. And then he just said, but that can't be pshat, because if I say this is the 10th time you've done this, right? The 10th test, that means is that there has to be an underlying theme in all the previous things that they did, which would add up in a mass to an apex, a finishing, a final straw of this being the 10th. So something is only the 10th test if 9 of the same exact thing happened before it. And so when you say, okay, you're testing God, what exactly do you mean by that? Because it's just a bunch of different things that they did. So, okay, you had the Chera Ego, you had Koirach, you had the complaining on the Yam. So in what way do these 10 tests add up to make a category which is justifiably calling it that this is the 10th, and somehow this is the worst? This is the worst of them, just like by Avraham Avinu, the Akeda was the highest level. This was the worst one, and it somehow expresses like the apex of the underlying issue of the first 9, right? How is that, right? And what is shot in that? Why is the taka so bad? Right, so you mean Chazal say Vayotzi Divaset Ki Chazal Kum Mimen Nu, so Chazal have a drasha Mimen Noi, right? That it means from him, which means they were saying that the Plishti people were stronger than God. Okay, that's kfira. That's not any different than the ego. I mean, you can't say because it's kfira. Besides the fact that Chazal don't emphasize the avera of the meragim as being kfira, they emphasize it as being lashon hara. So Lashon Hara is seemingly somehow the expression, there's somehow a connection between this idea of Lashon Hara and testing God, and somehow that being the Avera that expresses that idea to its full max, so that God says, look, that's it, you're done. You've missed the opportunity for this time around for there to be a real entering into Eretz Yisrael, and now the generation is going to have to die out. Plus, like we see in the Gemara over here, plus it caused the entire all the Karbanos, right? That was Leil Tisha B'Av that they did this, as we have coming up here in the summer. So if we're going to get a good understanding for Tisha B'Av, then this is the Makar. This is the entire Makar for that. So in order to understand this, we have to understand, I think, Be'etzem, the aside of Chinam, right? And we have a few, there's a few different times where you have Chinam in the Torah. So there's a few different times, and the other famous ones that we have are Sinas Chinam. And what's interesting is that this is a pasuk in Devarim, which describes the story that we're learning about in Shelach. And actually, this is the first time where there is the idea of sinas chinam that occurred for the Jewish people. And the crazy thing is that actually the sinas chinam was going towards it was towards God. The Jewish people hated God for no reason, right? So you complained by your tents and you said, Right? Because God hated us, that's why he took us out of Egypt. Right? That's what they said. So that was actually the first time where there was sinas chinam in the Torah. Now, therefore, we'll work from there to try to define it. So, what is taka de pshat and chinam? Right? So, no one intelligent actually believes that it means that you're doing it for no reason, because as we remember, in the lashon, chinam doesn't mean for no reason. Chinam means free. So the shayla is, what does it taka mean? What does sinas chinam mean? What does bechir shel chinam mean? And how does it cause Tisha B'av, right? And so I think it's a very, very long discussion, but the basic yesod is the following. The basic yesod is that there is really two main ways in which a person views reality around him. There is, a person has, inherent and preconceived understandings of reality that are incorrect, right? And that are not based on the Torah or God or anything like that. And essentially, the way that it works is that what a person does is that he has the ideas that he himself decided to assign a value to. And once he decides to assign value to it, then he starts investing himself into the fake value that he created, which is ultimately created by himself with a bias and a benefit and a complete lack of source in any objective reality, right? Objective reality being defined as the one that God sets out and the relationship with him. And essentially, what happens what happens is that a lot of people, they have incorrect preconceived notions, incorrect ideas and feelings about reality, and that's because they were raised a certain way, and just by being a human being, they have a bias, to be, to care and about things that are not really true and don't really matter. And the way that it works is that you have an option, right, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu tests you, and you have the ability to perform in the context of a test, which allows for you to change your emotional makeup of the way that you relate to the reality around you. So let's talk about the inverse case of our parsha, right? We tested God 10 times, and then the Jewish people got, they got disqualified. Who God tested Abraham 10 times, right? And Abraham, passed all the tests, and he became the ultimate Av. Now, what does it mean that God tested him, right? God's testing does not mean assessing a capability, because obviously God knows whether he can do what he wants to do or not, because God knows everything. So a test in terms of God to a person means, what does it mean? It means that God is saying, look, I am giving you the opportunity to become your potential. I'm giving you the vehicle to actualize potential. That is the definition of a test that God gives to a person. So when you have a situation that is not the best, and it's hard and difficult, and you overcome it, right, then you have now actualized further, right? So when Avram is this very nice chesed, his whole life is chesed, he's always giving, kind, and God told him that this was his chosen son, and he says, you know what, go sacrifice him. Why? Because I said so. Do you want a relationship with me? Yes or no? Oh, but is a relationship with me going to cost all of what you thought that you were going to get? It's going to cost even what I told you were going to get. That's what God said to Avram. He said, but I want to sacrifice it anyway. Avram didn't. The Chazal emphasized that the Avos, they didn't question God. They did it. They were tamim. He said, God says, I do. Why? I trust him. And so essentially what the idea is that when God tests an individual, what it means is that God gives the opportunity for that individual to actualize potential and to become greater and more. And that is the idea of God testing an individual, because people, the way that they relate to the world emotionally and intellectually is flawed for the most part, right? And therefore, at the time that they're given tests and opportunities to relate to the world differently, that is the idea of Nisayon. Now, what would it mean that a person tests God? What it means is exactly the same thing in the inverse. So, God, people, we say, like, people use the terminologies Hashem, God, all these different words, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, Makom. In the most down to earth term, right? God is a being that is everything. He is reality. God is reality, right? The world is just a breakaway from the reality that is God, because that God wanted to have people choose to relate to him. But simply speaking, a relationship with God is a relationship with reality, because God is reality. That's literally what he is. He is being. God is being. So therefore, when you test the being that is being and you test reality, what are you doing? What you're doing is you are you are you are consistently what you're doing is you're developing and investing yourself further into yourself and your incorrect preconceived notions of how reality works. Every time they tested God, just like when God tested Avram, that was an opportunity for him to actualize himself and to become closer to God through the actualization, because of what he learned and because of the emotional reality that he had to undergo in order to pass the test. When Jewish people tested God in the desert, each time they invested more and became more their incorrect understandings, their false realities that they came up with for their convenience, right? And this is what is meant by the pasuk. The pasuk says, "Zacharnu es hadaga." It says in last week's parsha, right? We remember the fish that we ate in Mitzrayim chinam, for free, right? And Rashi says over there, it means chinam min hamitzvos, free from mitzvos, which means that essentially they wanted to live a reality in which they can take and exist in the world, but it should be only on their terms and only in the terms of what they think of, what they indulge in, and what they believe in their perspective is. And so the idea of the testing of God was that each time the Jewish people invested themselves and became more and more and more fake and pathetic and not real and further from God, because they kept on insisting and doing actions which solidified in themselves that they did not emotionally connect to the mitzias of the fact that God existed, right? And that's what it means that they tested God. People don't even understand what that means. That's what that means. And so the idea is that chinam doesn't mean for nothing, free, right? Chinam means that it's not based in reality, period, right? So when we say that the basic mention is chinam, it doesn't mean for nothing. It doesn't mean for nothing at all. It could be for a very good reason. It could be for a wonderful reason. It could be that the person, um, you know, maybe he hit your car. Maybe it doesn't make a difference. The idea is that as far as the Torah is concerned, hate is only an emotion that's reserved for a very, very specific type of person. When you hate outside of that context, what that means is that you are indulging a self-created vision and perspective on reality, and you are making and you're embracing that to the point where you now hate someone because of a fake construct that you made in your own mind. It doesn't even exist. It's not even a real reason to hate somebody. So that is the definition of chinam. Chinam just means anything that's not based in reality, right? And the reason why it's free is because there is no, it's literally the idea of free, right? To get something for free is because it's completely self-indulgent. It doesn't cost at all, right? There is no investment necessary. There is no understanding necessary. You just construct it, and then you indulge in it, and you go with it. You ride with it. You emotionally invest in it, and it's easy, and it's free in ultimate sense because it takes no work, and you get to experience a very high level of emotion um, when it's just completely unjustified. And so the aside over here, the aside of Bechir Shel Chinam, right, is that essentially we understand that Bechia is a, crying is a bodily reaction to an extreme level of feeling and emotion in something. Right? That's what triggers crying. So crying for nothing, what that did was, and what that means is that you have a generation of people who are so delusional, so invested into a completely false narrative and understanding of reality that when they hear something which would infringe upon that, their reaction is to cry. Right? They're so there it's that they so don't believe, they're so invested in the idea that there is no God and God doesn't want to relate to them. And you know, and that's what it says over here. It literally says, they said, B'sinas Hashem osanu, because God hated us. Right? What's pshat? And Rashi says, V'hu oyev eschem. He says, God loved you. Aval atem soneim oso. But you hated God. So what happened is that you weren't looking to relate at all. You weren't looking to actually understand what the other being or person was feeling or expressing. You hated God and you self-projected, right? And that is the entire yesod of Avodah Zarah. That is the entire yesod of the testing of Emunah. When you Avodah Zarah, all Avodah Zarah is, the Chazal say that Bnei Yisrael only worship Avodah Zarah so they can do arayos, right? There's a separate Yitzhar Harvard, that's true, but the idea is that you what does that mean that you have an Avodah Zarah? What it means is, look, I want to do what I want, but I have this very strong desire to worship something for like meaning and purpose. So you create a kuchkala and you say this kuchkala is God, and now I'm going to bow to the kuchkala to fulfill this like burning desire for meaning and purpose which they had in those days, which was the Yitzhar Avodah Zarah. And in order to fulfill that, I'm going to bow to this thing so that I can say this thing is God and worship it and fulfill that emotional need. But at the same time, I could do whatever the heck I want because this piece of wood is never going to tell me that I can't sleep with my sister, which is what Chazal say. Arayos are lo of the Yisrael v'azar el lahati arayos. That's what Chazal say. So that is the essential yesod, and the entire idea, the entire issue of Tisha B'av and of the Meraglim and of Bnei Yisrael to this day. Because again, the Chorban Bayis Sheni and Rishon, the fact that we're still doing Tisha B'av, to this day is the same exact issue. It's probably even worse nowadays. You create a narrative that's not based in Torah. It's not based in anything that's real and sourced. You decide that it's true, and you invest it to the point where it becomes who you are. That is chinam. That is the entire yesod of chinam. And therefore, as long as the Jewish people are in this trap of chinam, of being unwilling to come out of their preconceived, made up notions about reality and about what's right and what's wrong, and they're not willing to embrace a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where they believe Him totally and trust Him to tell them what's right and what's wrong and how to live their lives, then that's ultimately where we're going to be stuck in. And just to end off, is the answer to our question, which I think is a very good teretz, is the following thing. We said that the Rashi used a strange lashon by the Meraglim when it says kulam anashim, right? They're all anashim, which means they're chashuvim. And then Rashi says, okay, so the chashuvim. So what's plan they did in Meraglim? Is that ba'is asher ksherim hayu, they were kosher. So what does chashuvim mean? Chashuvim means literally it means thought of. A machshava is a thought, and a chashuv is someone who is thought of, which means that he has a position of importance, which means that many people think about him. He is thought of. That is what the word chashuv and chashivas means. So, what I think Rashi is coming onto a Meshibatik side along the lines of what we're saying, and Rashi is saying something very, very important. He's saying, look, he's saying these people were the chashuvim, right? They were the ones that were thought of, which means essentially that the idea of the way someone becomes important is because society generates generic subsets of accomplishment and understandings, and when a person has those in an extreme, he automatically takes on a level of importance because many people believe that the reality of what he is what they want, and therefore it becomes important, right? So nowadays it's with money, right? Or if depending on what circles you're in, could be you learn a lot, could be you're a very muscular guy, you lift a lot, right? So automatically that's how it works. It's a generic subset of accomplishment, and when that person accomplishes that generic subset in an extreme, he is now important. So essentially, you can tell by the fact of if someone important is a certain way, and it's emphasized in the fact they're important that they're that way. That is the main thing that generation, those people were. That's how they were. That's what they were into. That's the level they were at. And so Rashi is telling us like this: the idea of ksherim hayu as opposed to tzadikim hayu is very simple. A tzaddik doesn't mean someone who does everything right. Right? That's if you still think that, then that's a problem. Right? A tzaddik doesn't mean someone who does everything right at all. It means someone who is committed to having a relationship with Hakadosh Baruch Hu and keeping Torah mitzvos. Someone who made that commitment is a tzaddik. That's based off of Gemara and Kedushin. It's a long sugya. We're not going to get into it now. Kasher is someone who is, like we say, kosher. What does it mean something is kosher? It means it's an acceptable standard to eat it, right? In our vernacular, right? So it's kosher. It's kosher means it's kosher. It's good to go. It's good to eat. If a person is kosher, what that means is just what it sounds like. This person, he's okay. He's fine. He's good. There's nothing wrong with him. It's kosher. That's what it means. But we don't want if the Klal Yisrael's chashuvim were kosher, what that means is that the Klal Yisrael in that generation did not have any desire for a long-term relationship. They didn't want something long-term. They didn't want to keep growing. They didn't want to come out of their foolish and innate perspectives that they had that were incorrect. And that's why they weren't called tzaddikim. Right? He didn't say tzaddikim. He said ksherim. They were kosher. They didn't have anything wrong with them. They didn't do any averis at that time. Kashrus is just it's a description of a state of being of reality at one point in time. At that time, they were kosher. It's true. But they didn't have any interest in investing in a long-term relationship with the Hakadosh Baruch Hu. And how do we know that? We know that because Chazal say that after 3 days at Har Sinai, the Jewish people ran out of there. Chazal say, Ketinek habarech mibeis hasefer. Jewish people were like a child who's running out of school on the last day. Har Sinai was too much for them, right? And therefore that's the aside. The aside is that they were ksherim hayu, they were kosher, but they weren't tzaddikim, not tzaddikim hayu. They weren't interested in a long-term relationship. They weren't interested in sheva yipot tzaddik v'kam. They didn't want any of that. They were ksherim. They were decent, they were good people. And I had a raya, something interesting that Yeah, so I had a write of something from this. Yes, I did wish something, but I forgot it. So that is that for this parsha, um, and I hope that this was insightful and that everybody can gain from these ideas. I think they're really the MS of the understanding of the issue that we have now, and of what was happening in the parsha itself. So, if anybody anybody listened to it this far and finished it, kudos to you and good job.